And John, it's lovely to see you today, and thank you as ever for taking the time out for joining me. I've come back to the flowers. Yes, I can't resist. They're just so nice, aren't they? I hope they cheer you up as much as they do cheer me up when I see them. I know I often say this, but I just dreaded the moment when these go, because you kind of know we're sliding back into winter. And obviously we've just had the longest day here for the year in June, and you think, oh no, because apparently, tell me if I'm right, but apparently then it edges away ever so tiny every single day. Although we've had some glorious weather here if you've been on holiday in the United Kingdom. And if you do see me, don't be shy, come up and say hello. You know, it's always lovely to meet the chums. I genuinely mean that. I meet so many wonderful people, all thanks to this community that you have helped build. Truly, you really have. I am so grateful. It's just so fun when you meet people and because we've got similar interests, just get nattering about the same thing, and you think, wow, we all do share the same likeness. It's a little bit like these stories that I like to share with you, particularly royal history. You see, for me, royal history, I genuinely mean this, I don't think there's anything new. We feel it because it's in our time. Particularly I remember as a kid, do you remember when the guy broke into the Queen's bedroom? That was incredibly shocking, wasn't it? And you can think, how did he get into the bedroom? And how did he end up having a conversation? I mean, that has never left me, because, when you're a child, that particular age, and you're suddenly into news, you think, wow, he got into the Queen's bedroom. I mean, incredible. And it's a little bit like this particular story that I wanted to sort of share, just because you can see elements of history repeating. Let me explain. When you cast your mind back, one of the things that I find fascinating is the way that one of the biggest events that we all looked upon was that of the abdication of the king way back in 1936. It was one of those things where you think that must have shocked the world, particularly, take your mind back. I know none of us were around at that point, or maybe you were as small, I'm not sure. But the thing is, it must have been shocking, not just for, the world, the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, but actually to be inside the monarchy, because suddenly you've got this guy saying, you know what, I'm not doing what you want. We've seen this, haven't we, similarly with, of course, Harry, and by default, of course, the cable TV actress Meghan Markle. But here's what I uncovered talking to someone who was literally working at that point a few years later down the line with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. You see, they came across as this sort of thing of not being wanting to be difficult, and they just wanted a similar life, they wanted a role, but of course the minute they escaped, they started to cause trouble. Take note, Prince William, right? Because this is going to be a replication of literally what's going to happen, I believe, further down the line. You see, of course, the King, Edward, then sadly fell out with his mother, Queen Mary of Teck, and she has been given a bad rap really because she had to support the monarchy. That was the constitution, that's what she agreed to do. So consequently their relationship, as many people know, fell apart, completely fell apart. But Edward never gave in to the fact that he felt eventually the mother's love would make her come around, and that she would accept Wallis and finally push his brother to give in to some kind of deadlock, things that they could maybe get together. You know the sort of thing I'm talking about. Well, as we all know, that didn't happen. But what did happen was, a particular source was a former journalist from the Daily Express, and he, as a very young journalist, was covering all things royal. And this was, like late 40s after the war, that sort of stuff, very much sort of an interesting person. And what was interesting about this particular thing was that apparently the Duke of Windsor felt that if he came back over to see his mother on some pretext, under the line of I've made a mistake, I may think about, divorce, and what would the opportunity to be to come back, all of that sort of stuff. Now, apparently Queen Mary of Teck was very, very savvy. She knew, of course, her own son. But more importantly, the story goes that really the thing was that he didn't want to do this at all. What he wanted to do was alert the media that he was now sort of being weaseled back into the fold. He felt 20 years down the line, 15, whatever it was, that suddenly the public would have a different opinion of him. And the fact that maybe they did miss him, maybe he should be allowed back into England, maybe he should be allowed to have his wife called Her Royal Highness, that sort of stuff. Queen Mary was having none of it. Never ever was left alone with her son to have any conversation, and making sure that everything took place in conversation behind palace walls, if it was, things like that. He tried desperately on many different occasions to come over and meet her, but she was so terrified of being left alone with him because she knew that he could spin it in any way. As she pointed out, apparently to a source, his head had been, well, totally turned, and there was no turning it back. Of course, we all know that didn't happen, but as you know, after her sad funeral, just before, of course, the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, well, then apparently there was a note that emerged, and he said that he'd never met anybody with such ice-cold blood as his own mother. Now, according to another source, and this is where history becomes very fuddled, I think, is apparently he claims he never wrote that letter, but was advised to. So when you think about it, there are similarities to all of these particular stories, I'm sure you'll agree. And the thing that I find odd about it is that really it's all about one thing, isn't it? Power, prestige, and somebody else pushing the buttons. And as I said, history often simply repeats itself. Anybody now see the similarities? You can just see exactly what's going to happen, and we'll all have to live through that. But of course, in many years down the line, we'll probably look at it and say, that was very similar to Wallace and Edward. Right now, of course, we're too busy living in it. Anybody else agree? Neil Sean in the very heart